You're in the rant wormhole where I rant about whatever my $15 a month plus patrons ask me to rant about. You can have one if you become one. Today's rant was paid for by Bianco Magic Wizard, who says, "Hello Digi, please rant about the disastrous adaptation of Aku no Hana or rotoscoping in general. Are you okay with it? If so, also in this instance I mentioned above, thanks." Hey, thank you too. Aku no Hana. I watched the first episode of the anime when it first came out. I thought it looked interesting, but kind of like fucking jank. It was like my immediate reaction to it was not to think that it was unintentional for it to look that way. Like my immediate response was, this seems like it's supposed to be ugly, but it is ugly, you know? And so, like, I felt like it was more of an aesthetic choice. Like, they were trying to make the show look a certain way that would be off-putting and gross. And it is off-putting and gross. And some people like that about it. But at the same time, it's one of those things where it's not going to work for everybody. Even if you appreciate it on some level, you still might think, I don't want to watch it, though, you know? That was kind of the feeling I had. But I mean, at the time, I just wasn't keeping up with shows, so it wasn't like I dropped it for that reason in particular. But finding out that the original manga had a very different art style that was way more traditional and manga-esque was pretty surprising. Like, I would say that if you were a fan of the manga, like, even though its artwork is comparably more generic and maybe wouldn't have drawn the same crowd to the manga as was drawn to, what the anime tried to draw in with its art style. Like, I think that the manga has good art. So, like, if you read the manga and you were a big fan and you saw this adaptation, of course you are going to be upset. You're going to be like, this looks like shit. Why didn't you copy the great artwork of the fucking manga that I love, So I can see why it would be considered a disastrous adaptation by certain people. But, like, in terms of not knowing about the manga and, like, what they were trying to go for in the anime, like, I think it was an inspired decision. It just didn't necessarily work out that well. And so when you combine the fact that they didn't go the obvious route and then they also fumbled going the alternative route that they went down, that's what makes it seem so disastrous, But, I mean, rotoscoping is obviously great. It's been around forever. It's always been a way of taking things to the next level with animation, because it's just like trying to animate something entirely from your imagination. I don't think it adds necessarily to the finished product for all of it to have been like, just from your mind. Because, like, while there are certain animation things, like, there's certain things you can do that will, if you're trying to draw something that is, like, the point of it is that it's this guy's imagination, then sure. But, like, you can't easily just imagine how to, create, like, the differences in foreshortening as you turn a camera around an object, like, just to think about how everything needs to move, and, like, stay in proportion to each other. Animating is a fucking nightmare, Like, when you really think about what they are doing in, like, the really crazy pieces of animation, it's just like, holy fuck. Like, how could you possibly do this without some kind of reference, whether that be just using a figure, like a posable figure and just looking at it and, moving it through the poses, or like having it, done in live action so that you can then copy it into, into animation. Like, these are just ways to make it make sense and be doable on any kind of regular time frame. But I do think that you have to be careful with rotoscoping because it looks jarring. Like, it looks weird because when you see something that looks real, like, it's like an uncanny valley effect that comes from, instead of from making, like, the character designs look too realistic, you've made the movement feel too real while simplifying the characters, and that puts you into, like, a different kind of uncanny valley, So, like, you have to kind of stylize the movement even of the rotoscoped parts, or just like to be careful what elements are rotoscoped versus what elements aren't. You know, like you could rotoscope movement without having to rotoscope all the faces and their expressions and everything, or every single gesture being made, or like plan out what you're going to have the actors do. You know, like it's different when actors are trying to just naturalistically act and then you're turning that into animation versus having, you know, a person strike a bunch of poses or do a choreographed fight scene or a choreographed dance scene, which is then just translated into animation by, you know, tracing the drawings over, like, or even just by studying it and then drawing it yourself, like. So yeah, I think that rotoscoping is, it's obviously got a lot of uses. It's perfectly fine as a technique. I think that tons of beautiful animation has been done with rotoscoping, so it's definitely not something to just knock out of hand. But it can be done wrong, just like anything else. And when it's done wrong, it's particularly embarrassing because it looks like you were trying to do something fancy, and like you're trying to unnecessarily stylize something, and then you couldn't do it. You know. So I think that's why it gets such a hard rap when it's done bad. But like, you know, Aku no Hana probably, like, I think that I think they did good enough with it that they drew in a lot of people who might have never read that manga, but at the same time, did they overall do the best possible job they could have done? You know, for either creating a great show or for creating an effective manga adaptation? Probably not. But, you know, it's interesting what we got at the very least. And that's it for this rant.